Hey neighbors, Clutch here. This week we're going to talk about transplanting. If you are new to growing, this can seem like a risky endeavor. Your buddy Clutch here will keep it simple and explain it in a way that makes it easy to understand. But before we get started, do us a favor and make sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. We love engaging with our fellow neighbors out there. So what is transplanting? Transplanting is moving a plant from one area to another. It doesn't matter the growing stage. It could be a seed, seedling, a young plant, or a mature one. You can transplant a plant at any of these stages, all with varying levels of success. Let me give you a hint. Seedling and mature stages are the stages of a plant's life you want to take the most care. Seed stage. This is pretty simple, yet there are so many ways you can mess this up. The easiest way is directly planting the seed into the growing medium or forever home. The first step in this stage is germination, which is basically getting the seed to pop and become viable. There are many different ways to start this process. If you sow your seed in the medium directly, then you do not have to transplant again unless you're starting in a cube, cup, or block. If you're germinating in a wet paper towel, you will have to do your first transplant. This could derail your whole grow if handled wrong. Once the seed has started to sprout, there is a taproot that comes out of the seed before the starter leaves. Damage that and your seed is done. This is the first transplant scenario. If you're transplanting into your starting medium, you want to make a small hole just deep enough for the taproot to go in and barely cover the shell of the seed if still attached. Make sure the medium is moist, not dripping wet or dry. Carefully place the taproot into the hole and cover gently. With the medium or something to keep the top layer moist, this should give enough moisture for the seed shell to come undone from the seeds and allow the first starter leaves to expose themselves. If done correctly, you'll have a small plant in the seedling stage after a few days. Soil inoculants. So there's a whole host of things you can put into your soil, but none more important than what you inoculate your soil with when you're transplanting, or should I say your medium. The most common one you'll hear people talk about is mycorrhizae fungus. What that means is a bunch of fungi that work together that provides a web inside of the growing medium to provide nutrients. You know, think of like a spider web that branches out, but it works hand in hand with the root fibers that it coats the roots in this fungus that gets nutrients from the soil. It's a beneficial relationship, symbiotic, kind of like Venom. If you've seen the new Venom movie, it works the same way. They work off of each other. One can exist without the other, but it's beneficial if they work together because they exchange nutrients throughout each other and throughout that ecosystem. So don't skip this step. If you're transplanting from a cup to a bigger pot, you want to get some mycorrhizae fungus. You can buy it in powder form, you can buy it in liquid form, you can buy it in granule form. They have some that are supposed to mix in water. Just do your research. There's a bunch of them out there. Get one that works for you. Don't get raked over the coals paying a lot for them. But it does help establish the root system in the plant. The thing is, it's not immediate. This is a process that takes time. It could take upwards to 30 days for the root web to establish. So it's important you do this step either right away when transplanting or when the next few coming days after your transplant. At that point in time, you'll probably have to get something that mixes with water, that's water soluble, that gets into the medium itself. This is one of those things that's beneficial even if you're growing hydroponically or growing in a soil media. So don't skip this step. Apply it to the root zone and apply it when you're transplanting. Seedling veg state transplants. Seedling and vegetative states are the two most common stages of life when people transplant their plants. There is more wiggle room when plants are established and healthy. Now don't get overconfident as you can still mess this up. Seedlings are just starting to establish their roots through the medium If you're growing in plastic pots, the roots will be stretching down to the bottom of the pots faster than if you used fabric pots to plant your plants. In fabric pots, the plants tend to grow outwards versus down. Think setting up a wide base for a big tree. For people growing in soil-based mediums, they typically will transplant from smaller pots to bigger ones based on their growing needs and growing space. You may go from a 2-gallon pot to a 5-gallon pot to give your plants more space and store more nutrients in the medium. If you're growing with liquid nutrients, you may not need to upsize your pot, but stay in a 2-gallon pot and feed more often. We will talk more about nutrients in the next episode of Happy Trees coming out soon. It is important to take note of how wet the growing medium is, as you could go to transplant your plant in a bigger pot and having all of the growing medium fall off of the roots, which can lead to transplant shock. This is a delay in the growth of the plant and can even cause the plant to wilt and grow slowly. A quick and easy way to get the plant to release is by pressing on the side of the pot and rotating it slowly to make sure there is nothing sticking to the sides of the pot in the growing medium. Gently lift or flip over the cup into your hand to let the plant fall out of the cup into your hand, and then you can transplant it into the hole you made in your second pot. There's a couple ways to fill your other pot that you're transplanting from. If you're going from a smaller pot to a bigger pot, you want to make sure at least a fourth to a half of that container is full of medium on the bottom, even if you want to make it a little bit easier. You put the pot in there that you're transplanting, and then you fill in the outsides of it with medium, the same medium you're growing in, or you may be going to a different medium just depending on your needs. And make sure that that medium is moist. You don't ever want to plant your plants into a dry medium. That causes horrific transplant shock because it's like burning the roots, touching dry stuff. Roots are moist. If you are going from a bigger pot but don't want to have to fill in all of that medium, if you're transplanting from a cup, take another solo cup that's empty, dig out a hole, press that cup into it so you have a shape of the pot you're transplanting from or cup you're transplanting from into the bigger pot. Release that plant from the pot or cup by pressing on the sides gently. It should release. Flip it over into your hand, supporting the entire plant and the medium, and then gently place it into that hole. You want to tap around the top of it to make sure it is secure, but don't mash down on it. Just gently tap around it, and you may have to scoop some medium up around the base of it to support it, or use a tie, twist ties or bread ties to support it. So transplanting seedlings takes a little more work than transplanting plants in the vegetative state. In the veg state, the plants have well-established roots. A lot of times they become root bound, and fabric pots is less likely to become root bound because the roots are air prune by falling off by drying out on the outsides of the pot. They just kind of flake off and break off, or they may just stay attached and you'll see them dried out. In plastic or hard-sided pots, those roots will wrap around continuously around the outside of the pot, around the outside of the medium inside of the pot, trying to absorb nutrients. What happens that can only happen so many times before the plant decides to give up the ghost. So to prevent that, in this tent, we have 5-gallon AC Infinity pots where we planted 6 plants, and they did pretty well in those pots because the roots air prune from the top and the bottom. The only downside about fabric pots is you can have a lot of moisture on the bottom that gets trapped, and you have mold and fungus and rot. This process can be repeated for mature plants. Most of the time when people will transplant a mature plant that is done flowering, is to preserve it as a mother so they can take clones or establish another clone or monster crop. This is done after a plant has been re-vegged to make sure the plant has adequate nutrients. If it's in a large enough pot already, then just add more nutrients. But if you're going from a smaller pot and you want to maintain it, change to a different medium, you will have to change the size of your pot just to accommodate. Think about when you have a seedling and you're transferring it over, you still have to add more medium, or you have to add more nutrients. If you are growing in a soil-based medium, you're feeding the soil. If you're growing hydroponically, you can just feed the plant wherever, whenever, through liquid means. But in the next episode, we will be talking about liquid nutrients, dry amendments, and other ways to feed your plants. So stick with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Right now, we have some things going on. We've already transplanted the plant, so we didn't record it. It was kind of in a hurried fashion, but this is a talking head video without the talking head. As you figured out by now, it's a bunch of clips put together through various stages of the grow, mainly through the early stages. A lot of these plants were transplanted from cups, going into bigger pots. And this is just one of the grows under the X6 that did pretty well, and just learning the different stages of the plant. So from Clutch here at Hi Neighbor, we appreciate you watching this episode, and stay tuned for the next episode of Happy Trees, where we'll be talking about nutrients for your plants.